Hey everyone, and now I am joined by Alberta's Mental Health and Addictions Minister, Dan Williams. As you guys know, I've covered Alberta's what's called Alberta's recovery oriented system of care. They've really been prioritizing treatment over safe supply, like we're seeing in other provinces, like our neighbor to the west of us over in BC. And they've been pretty roundly criticized for this approach, but it looks like it is finally paying off with some of the numbers that are coming out of the province. Minister Williams, thank you so much for being with us here today. I'm just going to let you really dive into it. What are the latest that we're seeing in numbers on the ground resulting from Alberta's approach?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. The numbers are becoming more and more clear. We've seen a year-over-year drop from 2023 to 2024 of 38% decrease in opioid fatalities. Now, this is huge news, not least of which because these are lives saved, Albertans, family members, community members of ours that we know now are being helped. Many of them getting access to recovery in Alberta, which wasn't possible before the United Conservatives came in because no one was building addiction treatment spaces. It's still not possible in jurisdictions next door, like you mentioned in British Columbia, which is focused on what's known as a harm reduction model and makes itself manifest in unsafe supply, in drug consumption sites on every street corner, in public and safety, and all of that compiles into seeing the same kind of numbers you see across the rest of Canada and the United States. It's approximately an 8% decrease in British Columbia when it comes to opioid fatality reduction, which is what everywhere is seeing because post-COVID we're seeing that drop. We're 4 times higher drop in Alberta. I'm very, very optimistic, cautiously so, that we're going to continue to see this system prove itself in the evidence and the data. It's becoming abundantly clear that harm reduction has become harm production under programs like Unsafe Supply, and that it's their Alberta recovery model that is about dignity and hope and healthcare for those suffering from addiction that is actually leading the way and getting real results. And you see it. You see it in your communities. You see it when you look for people who are trying to get access to treatment. And increasingly, we're seeing it in the data.
Now, I know that the United Conservative Party government has made pretty significant investments in this model. I think when I last covered this, it was a while ago, there was something like 11 centers being built in total. Could you give us an
Right.
update on how many centers your government has actually built?
So we have a center built in Red Deer, in Lethbridge, and in Gunn, Alberta, which is on Lac St. Anne, just outside of Edmonton. We have more facilities opening up this year, another 3 more opening up, 4 more opening up this year. And we're partnering with Indigenous community. We're going to have a total of 11 recovery communities. And on top of that, I also know that we need to care for those suffering from addiction. And there are a number of people who suffer in the worst throes of addiction, trapped, imprisoned by the addiction. They're the individuals that you see on the street in Jasper Avenue or in Stephen Avenue, or in towns like I'm from, Peace River, increasingly in our rural communities, that are intermittently homeless, that have lost personal agency, that some of them, because they're speedballing methamphetamine along with fentanyl, are fencing with the wind with a used syringe out front of the rec center as mom and kids are trying to get in. There's nothing compassionate about leaving those individuals to stay intermittently homeless, to risk overdose. We had one individual that overdosed 186 times that we know of with our provincial healthcare records. 186 time overdose. Each one of those overdoses is one breath away from death. There's nothing compassionate about leaving our family members and friends in that state. So we're going to be introducing the compassionate intervention legislation, where if you're a danger to yourself or others, like that 186 time overdoser, we don't want that 187th time to end up in death. And so what we're going to do is intervene, and potentially, if it meets a very high standard, then there will be a mandatory treatment order that could come out of that to help that individual suffering from addiction where everything has been offered, to get that person help and health care, but then also to restore safety to the community so that the people fencing with the wind with a used syringe, risking public insecurity to family members, to school groups, to those that we love and care for that ride public transit, to return that back to the city, back to Albertans.
Obviously, we're just coming off the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I know that a number of Albertans still have concerns about the vaccine coercion that we saw during that era. What would your response be to those Albertans who are unsettled by the sort of mandatory treatment that your government is looking to pass through legislation?
I say that's a legitimate concern to be thoughtful and to react if there is an overreach of government. I was very concerned about overreach of government in the past, and I think that's legitimate. But I'll say we're putting our money where our mouth is. We passed the Alberta Bill of Human Rights Amendment to make sure the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment to make sure that it's protected in Alberta law when it comes to civil liberties and personal liberties. This is not about overreach. This is about returning your communities to Albertans. This is about helping those who are in addiction. I can tell you now, Rachel, if it was your daughter or my son that was suffering from addiction and everything had been tried and your daughter or my son was overdosing 186 times, we would want society to be able to intervene compassionately, to intervene with a response that brings someone into healing again, bring them into an opportunity of recovery. Every Albertan deserves an opportunity of recovery if they're in addiction. And if it's your daughter or my son, we know that addiction, run its course, given enough time, tragically, it ends in only one of two ways. It ends in pain, misery, and with enough of a runway, it ends in death. Or the alternative is it ends in some sort of intervention, treatment, recovery, and a second lease on life. That's what I want to see for my family members and friends and loved ones and every Alberta citizen that is struggling if every other opportunity has been extended to them and they are danger in some way to cause harm to themselves or others, then yes. Yes, that's the conservative, thoughtful, compassionate Canadian and Albertan approach, is to care for them.
You were in Washington in September to talk about the Alberta model. I'm wondering if there are states that are looking at Alberta and hoping to mimic the recovery oriented system of care that we have here.
It's pretty interesting. We're seeing a lot of interest across the United States. I myself am going to Washington in about 2 weeks for the National Prayer Breakfast, and we're having meetings as well with officials to talk about the Alberta model with this incoming Republican administration about how we can share our best practices in Alberta with a recovery-oriented system of care, with that Alberta recovery model with them. And also, we've had Massachusetts and Connecticut very interested. We've had other states and state legislators in the Midwest and the Southwest interested in what Alberta's doing. The pandemic of addiction, opioid overdose that we see across Canada and in our cities, it's happening in the United States as well. Now, we had a federal government that poured jet fuel to create a dumpster fire when they put unsafe supply on the streets, dumping 100 million pills of hydromorphone, 5 times more powerful than heroin, unwitnessed into the supply of opioids. And we've had horrible policy where they think drug consumption sites on every street corner is going to solve an addiction crisis without any prevention, early intervention, and no attempt at recovery. Of course, that's going to make it worse in Canada. The United States also faces fundamentally the same problem around lots of supply of high-powered opioids like fentanyl, and lots of demand created by a reckless pharmaceutical industry that pushed on unsuspecting Canadians and Americans a pernicious and incredibly cynical plot for profit to have millions upon millions of our citizens addicted to the deadliest drugs on the planet. And so they have that same fundamental setting that drove us to this crisis in the United States as Canada. Thankfully, their governments have not had the same kind of response the Trudeau Liberals have had, where they've made it even worse. But the problem's still there. And so they're very interested in what Alberta's doing, because in some ways, we're further down the line than they are in terms of having to come up with a response, because our crisis is more mature than theirs is.
When you talk about this trip to Washington, it will come obviously in the midst of a looming trade war. At the time you'll be in Washington, it's likely that we'll see those 25% tariffs that are currently set to take effect on February 1st. Obviously, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has really been leveraging herself and trying to build relationships with her American counterparts in hopes of securing a deal for, all of Canada, if not at least Alberta. Do you think that your endeavor down to Washington and your speaking with counterparts there, are you hoping to leverage that at all to build those relationships and potentially solidify an exemption for Alberta as these tariffs come into place, or are you not focused on that at this time?
Absolutely, I want to build relationships, and I'm incredibly proud of the work Premier Smith has done in trying to find a de escalation and a common solution to our largest trading partner to the south. I'm an incredibly proud Canadian. I'd like to see this solved without any kind of tariffs put on either side. I think that's the net benefit to all of us, to show a stronger North America with two independent countries side by side. But I'd also like to see a federal government that doesn't make this unity crisis worse. They have no legitimacy, and they're telling us in Alberta what we need to do with our resources. I think that the hypocrisy and the condescension coming from the Trudeau Liberals is outrageous, accusing us of being un-Canadian, effectively saying that we're unpatriotic because we want to see a de-escalation of a potential trade war with the world's largest economic superpower and our largest trading partner. Where have they been for the last decade, calling us un-Canadian, not on Team Canada? They've been destroying Canada in every opportunity they could, leaving our flags at half-mast for a year, attacking John A. Macdonald and his legacy, who founded this country, tearing down his statues, putting them under boxes for 5 years on end. They've done everything they can, including Trudeau saying we're a post-national state. Well, the culture they set in Ottawa has consequences, and unfortunately, they can't turn on a dime and say that we've been un-Canadian when they're the ones that seem to hate the very country that has given them all the benefits and prosperity that we inherit today. So no, I'm a proud Canadian. I don't think the problem is with Alberta here. I think we're doing the right job trying to build relationships in Washington. I'll continue to do so. I'm incredibly ashamed of a federal government that tries to pit Alberta and province against province, that tries to condescend and take advantage of the very resources that they're trying to shut down when it's convenient for them to do so. All of a sudden it's Canadian oil or Canadian energy rather than Alberta oil. It's no longer dirty, but an important part of our trade negotiations. I can tell you, just as my position as an Albertan, if nothing else, I'm a proud Canadian, but incredibly disappointed at the cynical approach of the Trudeau Liberal cabinet. I've had enough Eastern politicians dictating to us what we need to do with our oil, whether it's keep it in the ground or use it to cause trade wars that make all of us poorer.
Minister, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right, everyone, that is all we have time for today. I hope that you enjoyed those interviews. Thought it was worthwhile to do an update on the Alberta recovery model because I've covered that story a lot over my career. And you guys know that I'm really fascinated by the trade war with the United States. It was so great to have a perspective from someone who has those contacts in Washington and who was on the ground for the inauguration. Hope that you guys have a great rest of your week. God bless.